Good evening, Tier 2. Tonight, what I'd like to do is to talk about the water supply system. That was Chapter 11. That was the assignment from last week. And from there, go into doing a deep well pump with a little bit of some side notes that I have, because I did have a shallow well pump at my house in Little Compton when I lived there many years ago. So I'm very familiar with that also. So anyway, let's get started. If you turn to the page on the questions, I know I can't ask you any questions. So if you have any comments, questions, whatever, put them aside. And when we go live later on, you can bring them up. Okay. Also, very important, if you see something that I'm recommending that is no longer done, or you've got a better way, especially, by all means, let me know. And if you got a better way to do things, sounds good to me. All right. Let's take a look at number 1. This is on page 1. If you've got the notes out, this is on page 186 of that what you downloaded. Water for human consumption is generally taken from the water cycle. List all that apply. I'm coming up with, on page 169, A, groundwater, and D, surface water. So let's take a peek at that. Okay, on page 169, this is on the top of the right column there, and it's got surface water like from a lake, river, reservoir, or groundwater like from a well. Okay, that was easy enough. And I think they call them aquifers out west. They have aquifers where it's like an underground lake, and they've been drawing on those for years, and some of them, they don't replenish themselves, at least not fast enough. And I understand the water level is going down, but it's not something we worry about around here, because we get strictly groundwater wells and reservoir, like the North Watauga. Okay, number 2, the top of groundwater is called, and the answer is on page 170, B, the water table. Okay, when they're checking for drilling a well, it's nothing that I never did this, but we were kind of related to this in a way. And what they would do is a Perkin water table test. The water table test, as I remember it, they would dig a hole, and at what point the water would be there is the water table, how high the water table is. And the perk test was how fast the water, you could take water and pour it in this hole, and it would like be absorbed. That's the perk test, percolation test. And with that, I believe that's how they design the septic systems. Still do, I'm sure. Okay. So that Perkin water table, it looks like you'll see a piece of property that's been cleared, and you'll see like a plastic, I believe it's a 4-inch plastic pipe sticking up. That's usually what it is. Okay, number 3, name the 4 most common types of wells. Okay, on page 171, they list them. There's a dug well, a driven well, and a bored well. Okay, the 2 that we see most often are the shallow or dug well and the drilled well. The bored well I am not familiar with. It says that they drill it and they put a casing in it all the way down. Never heard of it around this area. The one that is used around here that you might see, I haven't, but I know guys that have, it's called a driven well. And the driven well is, if you can picture this, down near the beach, you will run into this. And I believe it's like there's sections of pipe, very heavy duty pipe, galvanized. And on the end of it, it looks like a pencil. You'll see it on page 172 at the bottom. It actually looks like a pencil. Very sharp point. And that's the bottom section. It's got holes in it. And what you do is screw these sections together, and then you have this rig where you actually pound this thing into the ground by hand. and they call it repeated hammer blows. And I don't know if maybe they have them by mechanically, but I'm only familiar with the ones where they were hand driven. And in sandy, loose soil, it will go in. And it does say that 50 to 60 feet, which is exactly what I heard. There's some areas with beach cottages where there's very little rock. Now, obviously, if you've got a rocky soil, hard soil, it's not going to happen, right? This is not going to work. I did some wells, not a lot, but I did some, and I heard about these. There are not that many around. You have to punch it down, and then when you get to the top, I'm not sure if you run underground into the house. That would make sense, but I never taken it that far. I would not worry about that. The next, let's see, the shallow well that they mentioned, something I had on page 171. It looks like a much bigger well. Now, a shallow well is, remember the wishing well? You've all seen that with the little bucket and the crank. There was such a thing. The house that I lived in Little Compton, was built in 1860, and it had one of those wells. The well was still there. Of course, the rig and the cap and everything on top was long gone. And at the top of it, it was actually a cement casing about 2.5 feet out of the ground. But right at the ground level, it went right back into the stone well. And it was, if you can picture us, a stone wall, 33 feet high, right? It was all just pieced all the way up about maybe 3.5, 4 feet wide. It was easy to get down inside of it. It wasn't that small. And the stone was actually stacked up that high with no mortar or anything. The water would like come in between the holes in the stone and into the bottom. And it looked just like this. It was about 3 to 4 feet deep, 4 feet deep maybe, or even a little deeper. Because I never dealt with it unless it was acting up. And that was when it went dry in a drought. And the pump was in the cellar. It was not in the well. So let's talk about that later. These dug wells are pretty uncommon. I don't think that you will run into these unless you work for a well pump company. They're not that common at all. Nearly all the wells you're going to be dealing with will be drilled wells. Okay, so let's move back. Let's go back to the questions. And let's do the questions, then come back to take care of that. Okay, number 4. Lift pumps raise water as much as 25 feet. Now that's on page 175. And they have a pretty good diagram there. Now, I have heard these numbers before, and I remember this even out in the trade. This was the standard. When you have a pump above ground like this, and one pipe going down into the well, the lift, and they show it there, is 25 feet. That's about it. In theory, and that's exactly what they call it, the top page 175, you can go 34 feet at sea level. But with all the loss for friction and whatever else, in reality, about 25 feet is all the water you can pull out of a well, like a straw, like pulling the water up. And the pump does look like that. I remember because I had one of those. And the pump was in the basement. And the pipe went down into the well. Now, what they're not showing there, and you can actually sketch it in, at the bottom of that pipe, that purple-looking pipe, you could put a thing there called a foot valve. It's a vertical check valve, okay? So that when the pump shuts off, when it reaches the pressure that it's set for with the tank, it's got an expansion tank there, the water doesn't just rush back down into the well. It has a check valve. So as it's drawing water, the flap is up, and when the pump shuts off, the flap goes down. It's a vertical check. That's not a swing check. It goes straight up, okay? And it's called a foot valve. Also, the water comes in through there. Okay, that's where the water comes into the pipe at the bottom. Now, like I said, I had one of these pumps when I lived in Little Compton. I lived there for more than 30 years, so I was very familiar with it. I remember climbing down there a few times, not all the way down to the water level, but down to where the pipe went underground into the house, which was down maybe 6 feet. Okay, let's go back to the questions. Question number 5. Deep well pumps have a lifting device located, page 179. The answer they're looking for, I have written down here, is 179, is directly over the well. Okay. Deep well pumps. Directly above the casing, excuse me. Oh, the well is the same thing. Deep well pumps. All right. Uh, Again, we don't, unless you're a pump company, you're not going to be working with anything except probably submersible pumps where the pump is down inside a casing. I've done probably maybe a dozen, maybe 15 wells in my time, and they usually, almost always, were connected with a new house where it was a spin-off from the job I already had. I never was a well company where I'd be called just to put a well in. That wasn't my thing, but I learned enough about it that I could install a new well. Now, if you're wondering, is this hard to do? We'll give you an idea how easy. I shouldn't say it's that easy, but I had to give an idea. Back in, I don't know, 1978, 79, I had a young guy working for me, young kid, well, relatively young. He was about 20 years old at the time, 21. And I was trapped. I had to be in two places at once. I'm sure you've all experienced this. I had to be one job, two jobs. I could not get out of either one. I could not put them off. So I took a chance. Now, this kid had done one well with me, and he paid attention, smart kid. And I asked him, I says, do you think you can handle it? It was over in Portsmouth, and I had a job in Tiverton that I had to do. And he said, yeah. So mine was an all-day job. So bright and early, he took, I don't know if he took the truck or what. I think he did. Anyway, he went over to the job in Portsmouth and put the well in. And I stayed and did a full day at this other job in Tiverton, which I can't remember now what it was, but it wasn't a well. Near the end of the day, 3:30 or so, he shows up all cocky, feeling pretty good. He did. He installed the whole thing himself. He did a nice job. Um, it got hit by lightning later on, a few years later, but it had nothing to do with him. Okay, so in other words, if you do a well pump, pay attention, because if you do a well pump, pay attention. You can actually do one yourself, and it's legal. You don't need a license to put these in. And like I was saying the other night, you can make yourself a very, very good day's pay. And you can't beat it. And it's not that bad. Let's talk about the installation. I'm so tempted to get into the installation part of it, but let's hold off on that. Finish these questions. Okay, true or false? Reciprocating pumps can make use of a rapidly rotating impeller to lift the water. Okay, no. Reciprocating pumps have a piston going up and down. It vibrates a lot. They're very reliable, but they're not a rapidly rotating impeller. That would be the deep well pumps, right? The modern ones. Number 8, the type of pump that uses an ejector to lift the water is known as a jet pump. All right, we'll talk about that one later also. Number 9, that's on page 177. Let's take a quick look. They just mentioned that the jet or ejector is employed to help lift the water from the well. Okay, the jet, that's the thing to remember. Everybody calls it a jet pump. And the way you can tell a jet pump is it's got two pipes. So if you see it, a well, and it's got two pipes going into it rather than one, that's a jet pump. Or two pipes coming off the pump going underground, or probably underground and then down into the casing. That's a jet pump. Okay. I doubt if any of you are going to deal with those. You don't want to deal with a jet pump. They're a nightmare. Okay, why are pressure supply tanks used in water supply systems? Okay, this is here because you need compressed air, page 183. The problem is that if you don't have an expansion tank or the tank gets waterlogged, it's just like the expansion tank on a boiler. Water doesn't compress much at all, right? It's the pressure, there's nothing to take up the pressure change. On a boiler, when the water heats up from cold to hot, the excess water, because it takes up more room, goes into the expansion tanks, a little double the extra tank. When that tank gets waterlogged, you know right away because the pressure just goes off the chart, trips out at 30, and next thing you know, your relief valve keeps tripping out on the floor. Okay, and that's an example of what happens if you don't have an expansion tank. The expansion tank is filled with air, which compresses, as you know, very easily, very, very easily. And on a well pump, it's just a bigger version of that pump. Excuse me, of the tank on a boiler. In fact, it's made by the same company, and it's a much bigger tank. I believe it was a WX202 is the one you probably want to use. It's about this high. It's that blue color X-Troll tank. There's a smaller one, but I'd recommend the larger one. Anyway, let's see, where are we here? Why are precious? Okay, we did that. Pressure supply tanks used because you need something to keep the air, to keep a constant pressure as the pressure is changing on a well pump system or a heating system all the time. Right, the pressure is always changing, and the compressed air keeps it smooth, the flow of the water very smooth. It compresses, and then it expands depending on the pressure, and gives you a nice flow of water. In order to produce a sanitary well, the well must be, and then the letter C is treated with bleach. So what happens is when somebody drills a well, at one point, I think it's after they're all done drilling it, they throw some bleach in there, and I think they let it set for a while, maybe a day, something like that. But they have so much bleach they put in there, like Clorox, to kill the bacteria. And that's all I know. Like I said, I've never worked with a well drilling company, but I do remember them putting the bleach in. Number 11, the device used to seal a well at ground level in areas where freezing is a problem is called a pitless unit. Okay, let's see what they say about that. Okay, this is the only way we do it. Now, if you're down south, let's say we're down in Florida, especially southern Florida, where they never get a frost, you could run the pipe almost on top. You could run on top of the ground, unless you didn't want it to get damaged. You maybe put it down a foot underground. Okay, it's no big deal. Your pipe could come out the top of the well, and nobody would worry about it. But up here, where we are, and north of here, even more so, you would have to drill a hole in the side of the casing. So if you look on the picture on page 184, you see a pump down at the bottom in that sketch at the top of the page. And up near the top, actually they don't even show it, just visualize this, about 5 feet down from the ground level, there'd be a hole drilled into the side of the casing. That's where the pitless unit, oh, there it is on page 185, I'm sorry. Look on page 185. It's a pretty detailed sketch. But there it is. It goes underground. And you would need at least, I would recommend, no less than 5 feet of ground on top of it. Because if the frost gets down deep in the ground, which it doesn't that much, it seems to be less and less as years go by. But I do remember one year, maybe 40 years ago, the frost got so deep in the ground in Portsmouth, it froze the water pipes in the ground for the city water pipes on the street. So unless you have a trench that's somewhere close to 5 feet deep, I'd be very cautious. 4 feet or less, you're crazy, because if that's all the backhoe gave you, the backhoe is not going to get a phone call when all the pipes freeze. When the well pump won't work because the ground is frozen, and so is your pipe. So you need about 5 feet. Okay, I think we're just about done with those questions. Let's see. What special precaution would you need to take if you wish to test a submersible pump? Okay, what I have here is don't let the pump run dry. Okay, it's a no-brainer. Okay, a submersible pump requires water surrounding it to keep it from damage. Okay, it's not designed to work unless it's submerged, just like a submergible sump pump. Okay, and the last one they have here is the foot valve, which we already talked about. The foot valve is the answer for that. What prevents the water from flowing back into the well when it's not operating? A, the foot valve. Okay? All right. Now, let's see. I should have... It's about 15 minutes. All right. I'll tell you what. I'm going to finish the rest of the time starting with installing a well pump. I'll go over it quickly. Now, some of you guys that I had last year know this, and the guys I didn't have last year, pay attention unless you know how to do this. And if you do, if you get something better, a better way to do it, like they say, a better mousetrap, by all means, when we go live, talk to us about it, and I'll include that in the future. All right, so that is a general background on well pumps. Now, a few things before we leave. If you go to page 180, they have a jet pump. Okay, now they're not telling you this. I don't think they mention it here. Let's see what the disadvantages are if they list them. Yes, they do. All right, this is the big one with the jet pump. I've seen a few of these. I've worked on maybe two. That's it. My guess is, and this was many, many years ago. We're talking like 35, more like 40 years ago or more. And they were pretty scarce. I don't know anybody that's using these jet pumps, but that's a great sketch. So picture the pump at the top on page 180, top of the page. There's the pump, top right, and you got two pipes going into it. So just picture where you see that break through the pipes. We'll say it's coming from underground in the basement. That's how you know it's a jet pump. The discharge means to the house, right? That would go to the expansion tank. So the way that it works, take a look at the arrows. The blue pipe, the water goes down, around, and up the green pipe, right? It goes around in circles, right? It just keeps going around in circles. And part of it is there's a pipe that goes into the pump, into the well itself, pulling up the water, right? Now the casing, it makes it look like it's a very wide well. It doesn't have to be. This could be a narrow casing. So that pipe is pulling the water up, but because it's going around in circles like that, it can go way deeper than 25 feet. If it was a one pipe well pump, it could only suck the water up 25 feet. But because you've got water going around in circles, it's like your circulator on a heating system, right? If you took a circulator and you pumped and you held one end of it up in the air and you sucked the water in, it would only pump like 6 feet high. That's it. Like a 6-foot head. That's it. But the way the circulator works, it can go to the third floor because it's going around in circles like this jet pump. So that's how the jet pump works. It creates a venturi and all that. If you look close, you can see that skinny, narrow point in the tube just below where it says venturi tube. All right, creates a little vacuum there and it sucks the water up. Very clever, but here's the problem. The advantage is if the pump gives out, you've got it. It's right there. It's in the basement or wherever it's installed, usually in the basement. It's kind of like a shallow well pump. It's there. You can get at it. But the problem is it is a nightmare to prime this thing to get it to work. The little experience I have, I remember that. You're ready to shoot yourself trying to get it to work. And they even mentioned here, under principal disadvantages on page 180, air in either the suction or return line will cause the pump to stop functioning. And that one should be highlighted. It is very, very difficult to get this thing working from scratch. So if you have to work on it and you lose like the prime and you got to like start it up again, good luck. All right. Now the shallow well pump, I had one at my house for 30 some years. I lived there and it was okay. The problem was the well itself, the water wasn't that clean. And when I first bought the house, it was contaminated with a little bit of soap suds because they drained you can get this one, clothes washer uphill from where my well was. And the well, remember now, was just loose stones, like stonewall stones. So the water would like get into the ground and it ended up in my drinking water. So of course I changed that right away. But I suspect there might have been some crawly things that fell into the water or just whatever contaminants around in the soil get into the well. Because when I was moving, I had it checked out. There was a little bit of, I don't know what they call it, fecal matter. But it was slight contamination. And not bad. But the problem is the tolerance is so many parts per million or billion. There was no allowance whatsoever. The people that bought my house put a pump in right away, a deep pump. They drilled a well, and so it didn't matter. They got rid of that shallow well, which was good. I just didn't want to spend the money on it. All right, now what I'd like to do is talk about. Let's do another. I'll just introduce this. This will be a deep well pump. Like I said, pay attention because I don't know that you'll be able to do one just with a class, but if you ever have a chance to do one, pay attention because the next one you could do by yourself. All right, now a few notes on it before I really get into it. We're probably talking about wells that go from, I've done them as shallow as 50, 60 feet, and I've done up to about 300 something, maybe 350. I'm not sure about that. Maybe up to 300. I don't remember if I had to. I don't think I ever had to splice the lines together. So maybe I didn't go over 300, but they do go that deep. They actually can go much more than that. It's luck of the draw. Now, if you ever build a house, you buy the land and you got to put in the septic, that can go 20, 30 grand. And then the well pump, it used to be $10 a foot. And I'm sure that number is really obsolete. It's probably more like $20 a foot plus whatever other expenses. But you can spend 10, 15 grand easy on a well. Then you get somebody like us to go in and put the pump in. I've heard that some of the well guys now, since you don't need a license, are doing that themselves. I don't blame them because there's good money in it. So somewhere around 50, 60 feet up to, say, as much as 500. Now, at some point, the well company will tell the owner, look, I'm down 400 feet. What do you want to do? And they're not getting much water. They might be getting a gallon a minute. That's not enough. And that's up to the owner. Now, if you got a gallon a minute and you got 400 feet of water in a 6-inch casing, if you did the math, you might have like 80 gallons of water before it runs out. Meanwhile, the water is coming back into the casing, into that, because there is no casing. Everybody thinks the casing goes all the way down. It doesn't. It only goes down like 10 to 20 feet. But there's water like coming into the, through the sides of the well, kind of like the shallow well. And that might be enough, but I am not enough of a well guy to say that at what point you're okay, at what point you should keep drilling or stop. Or they say, don't throw more good money after bad and drill another well. That's painful. I never got involved with that end of it, but obviously I've heard that that's what happens. Okay, most of the time they'll drill down 150, 200, 250, and they'll come up with enough water, and that's when we come in. Okay, so that's what determines how deep the well is going to be. What's the flow? Now, at one time, there were two types of wells. There was pounded, which I think they call it percussion. And I don't know if anybody's still doing this. I suspect the guys that had these trucks probably aren't at it anymore. But when I came into the business many years ago, they were still using the pounded well. I haven't seen it probably in 30, 35 years, but I suspect it probably retired. Here we go. On page 173, there's a picture of the trucks. Now, the truck on page 173, they call it percussion. What they have, it's like that one I told you beat it into the ground by hand. This is a mechanical version of that. That tower that you see on the old truck there, you can see that truck looks like something from the late 50s, 1950s. It's got a weight that goes up and it slams down, and it twists every time. I believe it twists every time it hits the ground. It actually pounds itself down to the depth you want to go. And it can go very deep, but it goes very slow. It'll be there. The truck will be set up for several days. So if you hear this, it's like pile driving. You hear this slamming noise. In fact, if anybody remembers hearing it, since you guys have been at the trade, let me know because I suspect they're all gone. Now, the rig you see on the right side, you can't see the front of that truck, but I know it's a more modern truck. That's a drill. That's a rotary. That's the other one. Now, this one here, they actually drill a hole, some kind of a drill bit, like a, I don't know, auger bit, a hole saw. I don't know what it is, but it actually drills the hole, and it said it's more efficient drilling when great depths are involved. What I've heard is that the old timers say that this one, it fractures. If it's rock, it will fracture, and the water will come in through the cracks. This is what I've been told. This one is so fast that it will blow right by these places where this might just loosen up the shale or the rock and get the water coming in, where this one just goes right by it and even clogs it up as it goes by. And I remember when these came out in the late, I would say, I bet it was the late 70s, before I was teaching, so probably the late 70s, these got popular, but they were very, very expensive. And somebody told me that for somebody to buy one and to make the note, they had to put down some crazy amount of footage, we'll say 300 feet a day. It was something unbelievable. So this thing can really go. And it can drill a deep well, I believe, in a day, because it's so fast, where this would take maybe a week, several days. Okay. And I heard that some of the guys that bought these, the early ones, actually went bankrupt. So now that these trucks have been around forever, I imagine you can buy used ones. But at that time, they were all new. So that's the rotary. That's probably what they're going to use to drill the well that you do. Okay, so these are the two type of deep well drilling rigs that we run into. Okay, now when you get one of these jobs, you got to be used. I'm assuming it's going to be a deep well. Like I said, 60 feet, more likely 100, 150 on up. Okay, the two things you need to know if somebody wants you to do a well is the depth. This is the depth to the the water surface, the depth of the well. Okay, how deep is this well? Now the water in the well will come up. I've seen it come up all the way to the top of the well just once, right up to the top. And the flow rate. GPM, get used to that. Gallons per minute. All right, so this is a big one. So let's say that we have a well that's 200 feet deep and the flow rate is 4 GPM. You take that to your supplier. Now find a company that's reliable, that handles well equipment like this. Some of your supply houses, I used to use Robinson, and then I used a guy, Bill Sylvia. He had a well pump company in over on Lewin Street in Florida, up North End, and he used to install wells. So he could buy the stuff at wholesale. He'd buy the stuff at the same price as the supply houses, and then he was actually installing it. So he was like buying it once removed from us, so he could bury us. He was making good money, obviously. I got to know him very well, and I would buy my stuff from Bill. Like he was like a wholesaler, and he would sell me the stuff. And then if I had a technical question, obviously I could ask him. And one day he was hanging around, and he said, "Hey, come on, I'll go with you. We'll put it in together." We did. We put it in half a day. I never seen that before. He actually had a torch, and he'd actually torch a hole in the casing, the steel casing, to fit the pitless adapter. He didn't even need a template. He had done so many. And we were in and out of there in like unbelievable amount of time, because that's all he did was wells. And so anyway, getting back to this here, you'd give your supplier, whoever it is, the depth and the gallons per minute. And then you'd also have to know how far it is from the well where the casing is coming up to the house. Usually it's within 100 feet. I don't remember seeing one over 100 feet. So you get your pipe and your wire and everything. What they do is once you give them the information, they put a package together. all of the material that I'll be talking about is the same on every job. It's more or less of the same thing. Like um, the pipe and the wire might change, how much of it, and the size of the pump would depend on the depth and the flow. Uh, but that's about it. Everything else is the same. You got one of everything else, which I can tell you. And like I said, they will supply it so that when you go out to the job, if they got their act together, you don't have to worry you're out in Westport Harbor or somewhere that you got to drive back to the city to get some material they forgot. At least that was my experience. Okay, so what are we going to be doing when we get all this material? You give them this, day later, the order's put up for you, or it's delivered. Your choice. Meanwhile, you're going to have to give a price for the well, so you might want to wait before you start doing it, before you agree on a price. Now, my advice, and this is not in the book here, is that when you do a well pump, don't itemize. There's way too much stuff to itemize. And if you itemize, you're going to have some people that will tell you right to your face. They will look you right in the eye and tell you, I can buy it cheaper than that. I know where I can get it cheaper. Okay. But do you really want to work for labor for the rest of your life? If you're in business, you got a lot of expenses. Now, when you're working under the table, moonlighting, whatever you want to call it, yeah, okay, well, you slide on the insurance and some things. But eventually, you're going to, if you want to be in business, you've got a lot more than just making an hourly pay. You got to make some pretty good money. So you want to mark up your material. How much is up to you. Now, these jobs are, this is a package price, right? It's or you want to call it a contract price. And what you want to do is to find out from somebody that you trust how much you should be getting for this job. Now, I'm not sure who you're going to ask for this here, because unless they know you and you're a friend, they're probably not going to want to help you to cut them out of any work. But let's say that you can find somebody and they'll tell you how much to charge on a well that's such and such a depth and with a certain size pump and so on. And they'll tell you, I'm going to make up a number. We'll say $1,500, right? That's what a well pipe company would get. Now, because you don't have insurance and you're working under the table, you can go a little bit less than that, but don't sell yourself short. I was just to tell night school guys, if your boss is getting like $120 an hour, you shouldn't be getting any less than half that. Any less than half that, you shouldn't be you should be doing something else. So find out what they're getting and get at least half that. But this here now is a little different, this well pump, because you don't see any of the hourly rate. Now, you might find that the material, we'll say the material is, I don't know. Like I said, my prices now are just so out of whack. Let's say it's $800 for the material, and you got, I'm going to give you 6 hours of labor. We'll make it $80 an hour, so we'll make it $480. This would be material and labor. Material, of course, will include taxes. So we got $1,280. All right, that's not high enough, right? So you should have, if your labor and your hourly rate is $480 for a job like this, I would say at least $800 more than that. So that's $1,280. So this would be at least a $2,000, maybe $100 job. Okay, you want to make considerably more than your hourly rate, but don't itemize. Avoid itemizing when you can. But on the flip side of that is, I didn't itemize. I rarely itemized anything when I could not, because it just causes controversy, and it's very time consuming to itemize every little thing that you use. But if you're called on it and somebody wants it itemized, be sure that your price isn't too far out of whack that you can't itemize it. I know there's some companies out there that charge these breathtaking prices just to clean a drain. I don't know how that works, but I always was careful that if anybody wanted an itemized list, I could give it to them. Okay. The pricing, I'll leave up to you. That's going to be a matter of experience. You'll know what you want to work for, right? Also, warranty. I'm going to mention it very quickly. I think you all are aware of this, that you guys are all tier 2 anyway, so you know this. You warranty your work officially or unofficially for 1 year. So anything that you did and it is a result of your workmanship, you should, without question, go back and take care of it. Now, if it's something let go a year and a half into it, and you go back and it's something leaking, something you soldered, something you put together that shouldn't be leaking, just for goodwill, I would say fix it, no charge. Okay, it's worth it to you in goodwill to take care of that rather than to say that you don't know anything about it. Now, if they supply the material, what you should say is, if you want to do the job, that you'll install whatever they supply. But if that material becomes defective, breaks down, you're only responsible for the connection that you made to hook it up. Okay, be sure you make that clear. Man, if they're going to be nervy enough to go buy the material to cut you out of that part of the job, then there's no way that you should have to get involved with the labor to change it or do anything with it. Okay, so you got all your material? I'm also running over, so I'll tell you what, let's shut this one off, and I'll come back on the other side